I'm going to pass things on to Dave now, who's going to talk about copyright and open access.
Thanks so much, Amelia. So really what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit of a backstory to why we're in the situation that we're in with regards to open access and ensuring that we have public and equitable access to research. And that has to do with the interaction between copyright and open access. So actually, before I get into what copyright is, I wrote a little poem in anticipation of today's meeting. It's a haiku, so it's very short. Don't worry about it. Words bound by the law, sharing knowledge with respect, fair use guides our hands. So this might not be a very good poem, but as of this morning when I finished writing it, I am now the proud copyright owner of that work. So the question then becomes, well, what rights to that work does that provide for me? So in Canada, where the copyright law that we follow is articulated here, essentially that means I have the exclusive legal right to reproduce, produce, publish, or perform that work. And that applies to literary works, artistic works, dramatic works, musical works. And some of these are actually pretty broad categories. So literary works includes journal articles or books or even software, anything really textual ultimately at the end of the day. And upon the creation of that work, like my hard-working haiku this morning, I am the copyright holder. I don't have to do anything else to secure that. And I have these wonderful rights associated with the work that I've created. And in fact, I have those rights for the entirety of my life. And in Canada, the US, and many other countries, copyright continues to inherit the work for 70 years after my death. So this work won't enter into the public domain so that everyone else can enjoy and benefit from it and use it as they wish. My haiku will be locked down for quite a while. So I'm not too worried about that. However, it's important to note, and where the story sort of gets interesting for the purpose of open access, is that I could, if I wanted to, transfer that copyright that I have in my haiku to another publisher or to my employer or to somebody else who I wanted to have ownership in. Basically say, all those rights that I supposedly have with this work, I'm now giving those over to you. So this, in the academic context, in the sort of context of research and scholarship, is pretty routine. In fact, most researchers who are publishing journal articles or writing books or doing any work routinely transfer those rights to the academic publishers that they decide to publish with. So if I wanted to, I could do so. And if you look, there's a snippet here, and I'm not going to read through all of it, of sort of some common boilerplate language that most authors would have to agree to when they sign a copyright transfer agreement that basically says, all those rights that you used to have, now you're giving those rights to us as the publisher. And this, actually, I believe, is a sample from Wiley Publishing, for example. So I think there's some important things that happen. There are some very important things that happen after copyright transfer and that make open access important and why the open access movement gained so much momentum in the last 10 to 15 years. And once I transfer those rights to the publisher, essentially they become locked down to a certain extent, and they only become available under the terms that the publisher is, or the new rights holder is willing to distribute them under. So they could say, no one could read my haiku unless you pay for it. And I'm sure there's lots of people who are willing to pay for that wonderful work. But nonetheless, they're sort of controlling the access to it. And even from the point of view of the author, you'd think, hey, I wrote this work, it was my intellectual labor, but there's quite a few things, if you kind of take a look at, that I may be restricted from doing, even though I'm the person who wrote it. So I might not be able to share this work in an institutional repository like Pascal was talking about. I might be restricted in how I can do that. I might not be able to commercially benefit from the work that I created. And I might not have any control over how the publisher decides to do things with that work in the future. So if they decide to reprint it somewhere and I don't like where that is, I don't have any say over that any longer. And so most importantly, again, for the purpose of today's talk around open access, is typically and historically, these works have been sort of tightly controlled, and access has only been made available to them if you're willing to pay, or if you're like us at an academic library where we pay a license so that people who are at our campus can access those works. And this is where the open access movement comes in and is important, is that it's emphasizing that we want to ensure free and public access to this information. And to enable that, something that is developed alongside open access is the Creative Commons license set. And I'm not necessarily going to go through all of these here, but you can see that it allows the rights holder to apply very clear terms of use that really are quite helpful to us in the digital age. So if you're wanting to make your work more openly available, you could use a Creative Commons attribution license, which says, really, as long as you give me credit for my haiku, you can share it with whoever you want. You could reproduce it as many times as you want, and you could do whatever you wish with it. If I wanted to retain more commercial rights, I could say use a non-commercial attribution license where I say, no, feel free to share it with whoever you'd like, copy it, reproduce it as much as you want. You're just not allowed to benefit from it financially without my permission. So really what Creative Commons alongside open access does is it tells users who are trying to access these materials what they're allowed to do with the work and how they can actually utilize it clearly in the digital context. So I'm just going to wrap things up because I know I only have 5 minutes here. So I want to kind of go over some of the key points I talked a little bit about today. So, and if you take nothing else away, it is important to note that authorship and copyright are obviously integral to academic publishing and how scholarly research ultimately becomes available and who has access to it. And so it's very important to think about as an author, whether you're writing a little haiku or whether you're part of a research team and publishing some fantastic work, thinking about the rights that you have, how copyright transfer works, and how works are made available after you publish them is very important to ensure that we have broad access and that we have a better communal access point for all of these works. And part of that, and a key part of it, is the Creative Commons licenses, which help explicitly articulate how those works can be used and reused alongside of their being open access. But I think there's more to this story. And the last point, and I'm sure this will get picked up on later, is that academic publishers, they were resistant for quite some time to the open access movement, but in many ways, they've sort of adopted it in a certain way. They are certainly supporting and now regularly utilize Creative Commons licenses, but this has actually come at a cost. So it hasn't been necessarily a clear, happy ending to the story. So even though they utilize Creative Commons licenses and have been making works available open access that they publish, this can come with additional costs. It may come at a charge to the researcher. So Pascal mentioned diamond open access journals, where you don't have to pay to access or publish in those journals. Many journals that provide open access from traditional publishers require the authors to pay a substantial fee to publish there. Or those costs are passed on to libraries or institutions who have to try to support them. So there is more to the story, and I'm going to wrap up my point of it there and pass it on to our next speaker. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Dave. Your haiku is beautiful, and I really needed that today. Thank you.